like to commence by acknowledging the fact that I am sitting here on Aboriginal land. So I acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which I'm sitting, the Wurundjeri people, the Kulin Nations. I'd like to acknowledge any Aboriginal people who are listening and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So the discussion we'll have, it's more of a sort of a panel discussion, and I'll introduce my co-presenters in a minute, but just wanted to explain that today is the 30th of April, and apparently it's a thing called Email Debt Forgiveness Day. And this is a manufactured holiday, not a public holiday, but a holiday from correspondence. So it was invented by a couple of podcasters in the United States about 5 or 6 years ago, a guy called Alex Goldman, who said, we need a day where all those emails that have been banking up in our inbox and we've been too afraid to respond because we've let it get too long and we feel nervous or anxious about responding, we need a day where we can just respond to them, no questions asked. And that got the discussion happening at the Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria, because we're a free service that's provided by the state government of Victoria, and we're here to provide a way for people to resolve their own conflicts without having to go to court or take other action. Now, that might be that we'll organise a meeting, like a mediation, or it could be that we coach people through how they communicate with others. And what we've found is that delay often does bring dismay, that a prime contributor to a lot of the conflicts that we have is because one person has sent a piece of correspondence and the other hasn't responded. So to talk about that today, I have two guests. So I'll start with my first guest, Sarah Reid. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm the Regional Manager for the Dispute Settlement Centre up in the northeast of Victoria in what's called the Hume region. So welcome to everyone today.
Yep. So Sarah's been at the Dispute Settlement Centre for at least 10 years. So you're a mediator and a case manager and a trainer for the Dispute Settlement Centre. And the other person I have today is Lynn O'Grady. Hello, Lynn.
Hi, David. Hi, everyone. I'm a community psychologist, and I'm just here today to bring a bit of a different perspective, I suppose, and just to have a look at what might be happening when people are in these situations. So, yeah, really pleased to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. And I met Lynn through Victoria University and their community psychology program, because there's a lot of crossover, I think, with what community psychologists do and what dispute resolvers do. They're often talking about resolving dynamics in a community. So I'll start with that question about when does delay bring dismay? Sarah, could you give us an example of a typical dispute settlement centre kind of situation where delay has resulted in conflict, tensions between neighbours maybe, or community members?
Yeah, so we have quite a lot of situations in that category. I guess probably the most common one is where someone perhaps is wanting to put up or repair a fence, a dividing fence between properties, and they might serve a notice to fence, or they might write to their neighbour saying, you know, I want to replace the fence, and they get no response. And that certainly can lead to quite a bit of dismay. In the absence of any other explanation, of course, the assumption is they don't want to do it, they're being difficult, they're doing it to annoy me, but it's always seen to be a problem that's causing the delay if there's no other explanation.
Right. So why would people send a notice like that? What's the thinking behind that?
So if people are wanting to do something with the dividing fence, there's actually legislative provision which requires them to serve a notice. And even though that is required, quite often it brings dismay. People will say, well, hang on, why didn't you talk to me about it? I'm a bit concerned about this. So some people actually do find it a bit threatening to receive a sort of formal notice in the mail or the email, as it may be. But they would normally feel they perhaps have to serve that type of document.
Yeah. Lynn, do you deal with people like in your counselling work where they've got something like that, they get a notice or something and it really hits the panic button?
Yeah, I think not necessarily specifically around that in private practice, but certainly interpersonal relationships and managing conflict and dealing with anxious feelings or uncomfortable feelings or things that perhaps come out of the blue, that you get this letter or email that you weren't expecting and suddenly it's there, and you kind of have a bit of a panic response, particularly if there's a demand on money or something you weren't prepared for. So I think anxiety and interpersonal relationships and how we deal with conflict is a big part of work that a lot of psychologists will be doing. I think a lot of it is how people, their personality coming into it, how they get along, how they deal with emotions and conflicts.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine people have different preferred styles of communication. Some people like to have the distance of written communication and they like the clarity of written communication, but that could actually be a trigger for other people.
Yeah, it's a formal kind of way of responding. So it's a formal, can feel quite demanding, or can be different. Say a conversation with somebody that you know who's asking something of you. So I guess it might be something that's quite different, not necessarily something people are confident with or deal with very much.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah, do you find that too in, say, incorporated associations or clubs or groups where you have some people who are very rules focused and some who are more communication focused?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly, you know, there's a lot of people will join a club or a group perhaps because they're very interested in the social side of it. And so they find it quite disturbing that someone might write to them rather than just talk to them about it. But again, from the other person's perspective, as Lynn said, it might be about trying to order their thoughts. So other people may prefer to write things down so that they get all of the points they want to make in there. And they may feel very nervous about having an interaction with someone where they're wanting something and they're not sure what their reaction is going to be. And so they think, well, if I put it in writing, that'll help the other party. What I guess I find, and Lynn might be able to comment on it, is when people put something in writing, quite often they write in a much more formal way than they speak. And that in itself can cause issues because suddenly the person feels, hang on, they're communicating differently. So something's changed and I don't quite know what it is. So it sets up, I suppose, doubts in the discussion to begin with.
Yeah. Is there almost like a temptation to be almost like a bush lawyer to put in fancy words that just to justify sending the letter or the correspondence?
Yeah, and sometimes too, you know, obviously people do talk about the issues that they're having with people that they feel they can confide in. And so sometimes people are getting, you know, advice from other people, which is contributing to, again, slanting the style of the communication and perhaps not making it as natural as normal.
Right. So it could be something as simple as you should put without prejudice on the top of the letter because that means that'll protect you legally. But then somebody sees that and they go, why have they put that term there? This is my neighbour who lives next door, and suddenly they're sending without prejudice communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously another common one might be to put a time frame for a response. So again, the other person feels very pressured, but the person writing the letter or the email might have actually had some advice or been told that's what you need to do to get a response. Quite often you'll see suggestions along those lines on different websites. It might be a council website, for example, if it's something the council has some information about, or a legal website that says this is the way you do it. So again, they're getting those other voices, I suppose, that are coming in and perhaps making things a little bit more formal than they would be otherwise.
Because that, I think, brings to the next question, which is, you know, is it necessarily avoidance or could it be a tactic? Lynn, what are some of the reasons why people might be delayed? We talked about that they might be just taken aback by the style of communication. Are there other reasons why people hold back in their communication?
Yeah, I think if they're particularly anxious, and we're hearing a lot about anxiety at the moment, and sort of anxious about what to do or worried about what they're actually being asked of them, then avoidance can become part of that. Or it might be just their normal way of kind of dealing with things, of kind of putting it away and I'll deal with it later, not reading it that seriously, not taking it that seriously as well. So they might miss that date on it, or they might think it's too seriously. So they might, you know, it's unfamiliar to them, so they might necessarily realise what it's actually about. But it could also be that they might then think, well, I'll be a bit cunning here and I'll ignore it and see if it goes away. There might be some of that, but again, it can be a type of style of communication, maybe, or a way of dealing with conflict that sometimes people might have. They might have found that works in other places, that that they can, you know, sort of avoid having to deal with it if, you know, people stop bothering them or go away. So it's kind of assertiveness skills, or, you know, verging on aggression, or, you know, submissive sort of skills in terms of communication styles and ways of managing conflict that they might be drawing on from other situations in their lives that may not actually work in this scenario. If there are some legal implications, or there are, you know, legitimate demands on them, avoiding it may not work, but they might think it will. So they might start off with that, thinking that I just go away if I avoid it.
And I think sometimes when there's avoiding conversation, the people anticipate the worst. Oh, they're toying with me, they're playing with me. But in fact, it could be, I think, Sarah, were you mentioning about the email might have just gone to junk?
Yeah. So we've had a client who recently, you know, came to us because they hadn't received any response. And in fact, the explanation was as simple as that their email had gone into the, the reply email had gone into the junk box and they hadn't noticed it. So quite often there are simple explanations. It might be the other person is treating the communication with equal importance, but they are just hopeless at prioritising. So they're thinking, oh my God, I've got to do that, but they just haven't got round to it. It might be they have got the overflowing inbox where they didn't notice it. You know, there could be stuff going on in their life which everyone would agree should take priority, but the person who sent the original letter won't know that, obviously, in the absence of some information. So there are many, many reasons that they might not be responding. A natural assumption is it must be me. They're doing it deliberately, but quite often that it just isn't the case.
Well, it could also be, couldn't it, that they're maybe you've got that notice for notice to fence. You think, well, I better respond by getting a proper quote. So I've called 3 fencing contractors and none of them have got back to me, and I was definitely going to send a response, but I thought I'd wait till I had all the facts at my fingertips, and I had an appointment with my lawyer. So there could be other reasons behind that as well.
Oh yeah, and certainly at the moment, you know, if people have had to go and get quotes and things or advice, it's been quite difficult. Obviously with COVID, there's a lot of backlog and people not getting back to people and tradesmen being very busy. So that has certainly, you know, been an issue for many people recently.
Could there be a cultural element too? And I mention this because I remember one mediation where I had a gentleman who'd flown down from Sydney for the day to attend a mediation. And through most of the negotiation, he didn't really move beyond his position. And he kept on looking at his watch and saying, you know, I've got the plane to head back. And, you know, I could tell there was a bit of sense of frustration with everybody in the room. And in the mediation process, you do have the opportunity to have a private session. So I said to him, well, you've flown all the way down from Sydney here. Surely you had something in train. And he did. But he was just waiting for the timing to bring it up. So sometimes you know, it could be a way that people negotiate.
Yep, definitely. Certainly different cultures will have different things that they think are important, or different practices in terms of negotiation. Quite often with lawyers, you will hear a lawyer say, oh, you never bid against yourself. So if I've made an offer and they've got no response, then you don't make another offer. I guess from our point of view, I'd be saying, well, you've made an offer and you've got a response, which is no. So really it's open to anyone to make an offer. And is this about moving it forward and trying to find a way to resolve it? Because if you both sit there saying nothing, you're not really going to get very far.
Yeah. So then we've talked about, I guess, a difference in culture in terms of personal and business culture, but could also your other, you know, your ethnic background culture influence how people negotiate as well.
Absolutely. So you've got language and understanding language, which might be not necessarily that the other person's not necessarily speaking English, but maybe not understanding in terms of the context around it, or how they perceive it, or maybe not understanding how systems work. So sometimes people from different countries coming to Australia might not really understand that this is just a process, this is how we do it, but may be concerned around what it means and that they've done something wrong, or may interpret it in a different way, which could then add to them perhaps avoiding it or overreacting to that, or even the idea of authority figures. So if it's something from council or something that they worry about, if they've come from a culture where authority figures are not trustworthy, or they don't feel safe in that context, and then suddenly they get something in the mail, or they get a demand of some sort, they might not be sure if it's real or how they should respond to that. So there could be some of those things that are happening in communities that, again, the person that's sending that might not be aware in entirely of that, or might not be thinking about that. And then again, the overreaction that they then have when someone hasn't replied. So then you've got that real conflict situation that's set up, because each person's got their own interpretation of that. So the person who hasn't got the reply is then getting more agitated or annoyed because they think, well, they're not replying, but the other person could be really wanting to do the right thing, but very anxious about it or unsure about it.
Right. So you could have a dynamic where a person is not getting the response they want. So rather than changing tactic, they keep pushing harder with their own tactic, being a lot more authoritarian and power-based and trying to push. And I think and that touches on something that we often talk about in our mediation training, which is the work of Thomas Kilman, and how people can adopt different stances when it comes to negotiating and collaborating. So I think the one thing we were talking about that people might adopt a more aggressive tactic, which is like the shark approach, which is very much a win-lose, trying to overpower your enemy.
And then the opposite to that is more like the turtle, where you sort of pull your head in away from that. And then, ideally you've kind of got the middle ground of, the wise owl is often the representation of the assertive person who's able to think about your own needs and what's going on for you, but also thinking about the other person. And then you can have like the cunning fox in there as well, or you can have the teddy bear that, wanting to please people. So doing what people want without necessarily thinking about what's right for you. So there's those sort of styles that I think, attaching the animals to it just makes it a little bit clearer and helpful for people to think about, well, what's my normal approach to this? What's my normal pattern? Or how do I respond in different situations? And it might be that we typically respond in one way in a family situation with the history of that, or in a work situation. We might be able to have skills that work in the workplace. We might be expected to be assertive, so we can do that. But then in other situations, we might take on some of those other characteristics into it as well. And both people are doing that. So you've got that dynamic there again.
Yeah, and that one actually intrigues me a bit, the difference between, say, the fox and the owl. Sarah, I think, we talk about a bit that at the dispute settlement centre, the difference between just a compromise, because often people, when they say, oh, I don't want to come to mediation because I'll have to compromise.
So I guess what we would be saying is, in terms of the owl sort of analogy, you're looking at finding a solution where each of you just looks at the most important things and you're not compromising on those. So whatever is most important to you is something that is part of whatever solution may be worked out, but there may be other things that aren't as important. So there might be a range of issues between you. For example, if you did take a club situation where perhaps a committee's in a bit of disarray and they're having a discussion and there's a particular conflict between two people, one person might be saying, well, it's very important to me that the rules are followed. I find that really important. And the other person might not actually be averse to that, but what they're concerned about is also having a social side of it. So how do you find a solution which allows the rules to be followed, but also the social context? They might decide, well, they'll have their committee meetings regularly and there'll be minutes and all the rest of it. But at the end of it, there'll also be a social session. So you're coming up with a solution that meets both of their most important needs. And the compromise is perhaps on the things that they're actually not that worried about. And quite often we see this in an actual mediation. We might start out with a list of maybe 6 or 7 items. And as you get agreement on the key ones, people will go, oh, I'm not really worried about that at all. It was just that once I was upset about the other thing, all these other items came up, but now we've solved that. I'm not fussed. We can really sort things out. So by focusing on what really is important and on the things that, look, they're probably secondary and I'm not that worried about, you are actually able to come up with a solution that is the owl-like solution where everyone walks away with what they need in the situation.
Yeah, and it's interesting with like a process like mediation, because for someone who's anxious, you can say, well, what we're doing is we're creating a situation where you've got a supportive environment for a discussion. You don't have to make any commitment to anything. Let's see what happens at the mediation. And for the person impatient to get things going, well, at least we've got a date, a time, we've got a point to progress things. I'm interested to just you were saying before about compromise, the different needs, because that's something that's often people, I think, when they're involved in a conflict, they're very fixed on what they want and can't see the different dimensions that it could be adjusted. So focusing on something in the home situation or even in the work situation where person A asks person B to do something and they want them to do it right now, and then person B doesn't do that. But when you think about even that simple command, there's the task you want to do and there's the fact that it has to be done right now. So even in there is space for negotiation and movement. It's about maybe changing the timing and saying, I can do what you want, but in 5 minutes.
Yep. And I guess it's also about exploring the reasons behind it, because you might tell me to do something now and I might think, well, hang on, I've got 5,000 other things I want to do. But if you can explain to me the situation that you're in, I might be quite sympathetic then and look at rearranging my priorities, because I might say, well, even though it's still not my priority, I can see it is important to you and I'm prepared to help you out. But again, in the absence of a bit of that information and understanding why it's important, people can't necessarily adjust and find a resolution. And I guess when people contact us, quite often the first thing they say is, what are my rights? So they're talking about legal rights. You know, do I have the right, for example, shouldn't I have the right to be in my house without the neighbour making noise, you know, having parties every Saturday night? And the answer is yes, but by the same token, the neighbour's entitled to have parties at their house. So the actual rights often don't resolve things. It's about trying to find a way that actually you can come up with a solution.
That's the starting point of the conversation and not necessarily the ending point.
Yep.
I mean, but the other reason why people might not communicate is they might not feel safe. Lynn, are there sort of situations where people, you know, maybe it's not good to communicate?
Yeah, I think if something's escalating and the other person is becoming aggressive, I think then you kind of need to think about your safety and how you feel with that, and what would be an appropriate way to kind of respond in that situation. And obviously the dispute settlement centre is a good place to ring and talk it through, and just to say, well, what are my responses? What am I doing perhaps that's not helping this? So just getting that little bit of distance, you know, by my response has this provoked that person, you know, what else do I know about them? Do I have a history with, you know, is this sort of something that's been ongoing, that's not just about this one demand, that it's something that's there? Is it, you know, something that else is happening in the relationship, or I don't know them at all, and so, you know, getting to know this person in this conflictual kind of situation. So I think there are times when backing away or saying, look, you know, perhaps both need to get some extra help with this, have a bit of time and space, is really important. That you don't want it to escalate, and you do, you know, see sometimes stories of neighbourhood disputes that can escalate and become quite violent and unsafe. So I think it is, getting some advice, thinking it through, and looking at yourself in the context of what have I done that might have made it worse, but also is this person's behaviour, you know, kind of out of proportion for what's required, and I do need to prioritise my safety.
And that's a good point about, when the behaviour is out of proportion. So sometimes it can be the communication, but things can get to a point. I mean, Sarah, we've had cases, obviously we even have a stream of cases where we have, you know, personal safety intervention orders that are involved.
Sorry.
That's good.
So we certainly do deal with those sorts of situations, and it may be that, you know, people in those situations have actually felt so concerned for their safety that they've applied to the court for an intervention order. We often will talk to the parties there and still be able to assist. So again, having that third person there so that they can help facilitate the discussion. So it's not about taking it over. It's not about telling people who's right and who's wrong. It's very much about helping them have the discussion in a polite and sort of respectful manner, even where they may feel, if they were just alone, a little bit intimidated. And we end up with some quite good resolutions. So, for example, I can think of a neighbourhood one where a neighbour was very upset about noise and threats and so forth coming from next door. We ended up having a mediation with the two males from each side of the fence, so to speak. And in the course of that, one person said to the other, well, look, you know, you're so angry. I'm very concerned at the level of anger. And the other person ended up disclosing they did have an issue with anger management. And rather than that being a negative, the first person then disclosed they'd also had similar issues, and they actually ended up supporting each other. It was quite I think the mediators had literally some tears in their eyes, because they walked out together talking about how they could support each other in managing their emotions, because people had felt a bit reluctant, I suppose, to disclose to the other person their weaknesses, but in fact it's the weaknesses that they actually had in common, and can sometimes make the breakthrough.
Yeah, and I think in things like neighbourhood relationships, often you don't get down to that deep emotional level until you have something like this, until you have a conflict that brings this stuff out.
And but, you may not want that emotional level with your neighbours, so it isn't always about, you know, going to that level, but it's about trying to find a way gradually, step by step, and as trust is built up, people may feel able to disclose things which help things move a bit further, or they may just be able to solve the initial issue and they're all satisfied with that. So it's very much take it at your own pace, but with the help of someone to assist.
So we've unpacked a lot about what is behind why people delay in their communication. So what are some of the strategies? Because you don't know whether it's cultural, you don't know whether it's a personal communication or a cultural issue that's, or simply a badly structured inbox that sends everything to junk. So what are the tips to, I guess, break the deadlock? First of all, if you're the person who has sent the letter, you've sent the notice to your neighbour because you want your fence replaced and you don't get a reply, what can you do to break that? Lynn?
Well, I think a follow-up that you're working on the basis that you don't quite know what's happening for the person. So probably thinking it's a bit annoying, but let's get a bit more information is probably a really useful starting point for that. So I probably should check if they actually received it to start with. So maybe I need a different way of communicating. So knock on their door. Do I kind of contact them in a soft kind of way to say, I sent this, have you received it? And, you know, just wanting to check if there's any, you know, it made sense and if there's any questions you have. So going in pretty gently to check first before you jump in with assumptions, I think is important in that case.
And that's a very good one to say, assume, I guess, as I say, rather than assume the worst, assume the best. Just say, hey, did you not receive this? I just want to check, did you get this email? And often they might be confronted with information overload. They don't want to know what to do next, or they're worried that they can't get another quote. So how do you build that bridge for them, Sarah, to get back?
I guess the way I would look at it is, and I've heard someone else say this, is treat them with kindness, I suppose. Assume there's a good explanation and give them a face-saving way out. So I might be saying something like, look, I sent the email, I haven't heard, you might not have had time to have a look at it. Would you have a look at it now? So now you might, even think, I'm sure they've read it 1,000 times, but give them a face-saving way out, and either they'll take it and hopefully still move forward with the issue that you're worried about, or sometimes they actually will say, well, actually, no, I did read it and here are the reasons I haven't responded. But at least you're giving them the chance to start the conversation. I guess as a non-psychologist, I look at it, if you back them into a corner, they're probably going to be a bit of fight and flight, but Lynn will comment in a professional way.
Well, I think that sounds right. Yeah. I think
so. Giving them that way out, I think is again, what's most important. If they're a kind of person who's a bit hopeless, disorganised, or a bit difficult, you're not going to change them. So let's work with them, give them an easy way out, and let's focus on what you really want to do, which is, if it is about the fence, the tree, or the noise, or whatever it may be, let's try and deal with that rather than try to change their personality, which is probably not going to happen.
And I think the other thing it sounds like you're saying too is give them something different to respond to. So they might find it hard to respond to a question about contributing to the cost of a fence that they don't necessarily believe is necessary. But if you give them can we talk? Can we just have create an opportunity for communication? Or just even get them to say, did you get the letter? They can at least respond to that, and then you've got something to move into the next step. So
the other thing is, you can take the natural opportunities that arise. So if they are a neighbour or someone around the neighbourhood and you come across them, it's probably worthwhile just saying, oh, hi, again, you might not have had a chance. What people tend to do is run the other way and then go on with the written correspondence. And then both parties are saying, oh, did you see the way they ran away? They won't even talk to me face to face. So if a natural opportunity arises, if the person says, look, I can't discuss it now, then you accept that and you let them move on. You know, they might be with the kids. They might have someone with them they don't want to know about the situation. That's fine. But you can do a very inviting way. You know, quite often the person you're dealing with is someone that you do come across, give them an opportunity to at least, you know, respond, you know, talk in person.
And when you were talking a little bit about, you know, there might be some underlying anxiety too. So is there anything we can add to that in terms of, you know, dealing with someone's anxiety?
Well, I think that just respecting and not increasing the anxiety. So respecting where they're coming from, bit of, you know, a comment that, you know, it's probably a bit strange getting a letter like that, or, you know, wondering what it was like for you getting that. Just to acknowledge that it might have been, you might have put them in a difficult spot, I guess would be helpful, and just, yeah, trying to tune into how they're responding. So I think it's always useful to think about what is it that what are they telling us in terms of their response? What could it be about? And then how do I ease that there? But I think an acknowledgement probably was a bit strange. You know, perhaps I could have let you know it was coming, or a bit of an acknowledgement that this probably did create, you know, some uncertainty or some anxiety there. I think that can go a long way. It's just kind of then the other person feels heard and supported in that if they are anxious, and they can open up the conversation. So again, like Sarah said, I think if you keep the focus on what do I want here and how do I kind of make it easier for us to have this conversation, that's going to go a long way. Of course, if you're the person that's been anxious and you're then thinking, how do I then broach this? I know I have to respond, or that deadline's coming. What do I do? So that's where, you know, an apology or starting off with, you know, I'm sorry I haven't responded. It's probably useful to bridge that as well. So very much a two-way process.
And to put the boot on the other foot, if you're the person who's got that letter and you're in that moment of blind panic, or not blind panic, but avoidance, what are some of the things you can do to get things back on track?
Yeah, I think that apology is quite good. Sort of thinking about, how do I want to respond to this person? Do I keep it formal? It's probably good. Do I want to respond formally and keep it at that formal level, and you know, begin with an apology, or do I want to go and knock on their door and just say, you know, I've had this, you know, just put it off, I've been really busy, and sort of plan it out and think about. Often it's really useful to rehearse what you might say if you're going to have a conversation that's difficult.
I guess that's where the old junk email.
Yeah, come up with an excuse.
Just found your email in the junk email.
Buy yourself a bit of time by saying, yeah, I got lost for a little while, but I've got it now. So again, it's that focus, isn't it, on the getting to what are we trying to do here, and how do we do it as respectfully and simply as possible, but both being firm around what is it that I kind of need in order to get this happening, I guess. And it might be that you're worried about you don't have money or something. So how can I share that? If, you know, I'm putting it off because I'm seeing there's a demand and I don't have that money, how can I, you know, share that? How do I plan? So do I talk to someone at the Dispute Settlement Centre first to plan out what I say, or find out what I could be doing about options? Because when we're stressed, we get tunneled down into our thinking and don't always open up all the possibilities.
Yeah, I might just jump in here at this stage, David. We do have a relevant question from Karen that I might just share. Yeah, just asking if there could be a discussion around some good ways to approach someone that refuses to return a phone call or a text message, and if you don't have an email or an address for them.
Yeah. I'd like to just add something to that conversation too, because that's sometimes a problem that we have as an authority is, you know, when it comes to email, when it comes to phone messages, is that if you send off an undisclosed number these days, often people won't respond because they assume you're a robocaller or a scam caller. So once again, the discussion might be not that they're, you know, refusing to communicate with you. It's just that you're using the wrong channel because they're assuming that you're a robocaller or a scammer. So, I mean, the first thing is to think, is there a way that you can change the method of communication if the phone is not working? If it's a neighbour, you know, you can do the old note in the letterbox.
I guess too, if all you have got is the phone number, and they're not responding and you've already tried making sure that it's disclosed on your phone, you can try a different time of the day. I know that when we're trying to contact people, sometimes it's just people do not answer their phone during work hours because they're at work and, you know, that the boss doesn't allow it. So think about those sorts of things. Now, I'm not saying ring them up at 5 a.m. or, you know, in the middle of the night or something, but picking a realistic time when you hope you're not going to disturb them, but you're likely to catch them free. Perhaps think either side of the business hours, but not too far. You could also think about sending a text message, just again saying, look, I'm apologising, again, giving them a way out, I suppose, apologise for contacting you about this, but I'd really be grateful if you could help me, if you could just let me know the best way that you'd like me to communicate. So again, asking them to perhaps volunteer the most appropriate way for them, or, you know, do you need some time? Offering to, you know, try and assist, and it is about the focus that you've got is on trying to resolve the issue. It's, you know, you're not trying to be difficult. So even putting something like that into a text message, and obviously another option would be to look at getting a third party's assistance. So it might be dispute settlement centre, or if it's someone that you know, it might be that person intervening. I would, however, say you probably need to think pretty carefully about that, because sometimes people are very offended that you've told someone else about an issue that they don't know about. So again, you weigh that up pretty carefully. You know, if it's a well-known issue, you know, for example, in a club situation, you might say to the president, you know, could you help me? I'd just like to try and sort this out. But again, I guess you've got to be guided by the context of the situation.
Some of those face-saving tactics, it might be, oh, look, I think I've got, you know, I thought I had Sarah's number right, but she's not responding. Could you ask her to give me a call, because I've been sending messages and haven't. So you don't have to say what the reason is, you know, and it could be in a family situation. You know, I can't get through to Auntie Sarah. I wonder what's wrong. I'm concerned. Could someone get her in contact with me? So going through a third party is a good way, even just to open the communication without necessarily. And it depends on the history too, of course, why that person's not returning your call. So if you've had a screaming match with them in their last conversation, then it's going to be, there's going to have to be some bridge building to get that communication happening again.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's an interesting aspect too. Quite often when there is an issue between us, we do get emotional. We like to think we don't, but we do. And I think that's not something to be ashamed of, but it's something you need to think about and manage. We all do that. And sometimes the fact that you're emotional means that there's clearly an issue there that you need to deal with. So it's a really important thing to be aware of your emotions, but it also can mean that sometimes your communication style is something that, again, triggers some strong emotions in the other party as well. So you need to think about that and how they might be feeling as well.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, I was just going to say texts and phone calls, if you're leaving messages, and people can interpret that in different ways. And if you are a bit worried about it, it might come across as not quite as friendly as you might be expecting it to, or it might not be the message being sent in the way that you think it should be, or that they would appreciate. So we know that communicating by text, people can misread different aspects of it. So it might be thinking about, well, let's just have a look at, or getting someone else to look at how I've been phrasing this, or the way I've been leaving a message. What other ways could I do it? So it might be getting a little bit of help around that as well, and then a bit of backtracking, but still being, I think, friendly, but also firm as well, not kind of backtracking so much that you're not getting the message across, that you're still wanting to hold on to what you need to.
I go back to that anthropomorphism of the avoidant personality as a turtle. And we all know that you don't get the turtle to pull its head out by shoving your hand into the shell and pulling.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you use a little bit of lettuce. And sometimes, and a lot of patience.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, the other personality we talked about was the shark. So if you are dealing with someone who's over the top, it might be a case of saying, look, I'm quite happy to deal with this, but I'm just finding it a bit stressful at the moment. So here's the way I'd like to do it. Happy to talk about the issue. It's the way we're doing it that's the problem, because that can be quite difficult as well.
Yeah. Now, are there any other questions that have come through the chat or the Q&A that people would like us to answer?
None at this stage.
Okay. Well, we're getting towards the end of our session today. So I hope that we've covered some ground that you find useful. We'd encourage people who have conflict or have clients who are in conflict. If you need to talk to somebody, you can contact the Dispute Settlement Centre. It's a free service. The best way to contact us is actually to leave a message on our website. Ironically, often leaving a phone call at the moment is not the best way to contact us during the work from home period. So if you leave a message, we will, with an email or a phone number, we can contact, and you can be anonymous and the service is confidential, and there's no commitment to meet with the other person or contact them. Often people just need to talk to us as a bit of a confidence builder or as a sounding board. And of course, Lynn, if your issues with conflict are more deeply entrenched, there's always counselling psychologists out there to help as well.
Particularly if you think there's a pattern here. This is how I always respond. That's the time, I think, because that's often what the work we do is helping people to see the patterns, and then where might that have come from. And then you understand it, you recognise it, then you can learn some new ways. New ways can become a bit more obvious.
And we have just had a question come through from Abraham. He'd like to know a bit about managing conflict with someone that's exhibiting some passive-aggressive behaviours. And how you can deal with a person that's acting in that sort of a manner.
Okay, who would like to start? I think one interesting thing when we talk about passive-aggressive, when you talk about the Thomas Kilman, is that passive-aggressive is often aggressive, but it's just using passive forms of communication. And you kind of got to recognise that for what it is when thinking what's the best approach.
It can also be a person who's been like the tortoise or the turtle, and then kind of doesn't quite know how to be assertive, if you use that sort of as a bit of a continuum. And so they're trying to manage it, and then they get a bit fed up with it. So then they tip and they become this kind of a shark, but in an invisible kind of way. So it can feel really to pinpoint. So again, if you can come back to, I think it's what we've talked about what's the actual issue here, what do we need, and coming back to that, maybe calling out, that's probably more helpful for us if we can listen to each other. Maybe calling that out in a gentle way is really helpful. And I really want to resolve this. So coming back to that firmness, but coming back to what it is, but being ready for that perhaps they are feeling quite overwhelmed by it, and this is their response to it.
Yeah, I think I want to think of passive aggressive. I think of, communication with teenagers where you ask them to do something, go fine or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, you're right about calling it out, saying, okay, you're obviously not happy with this. Let's talk about it. So that open stance of communication, rather than letting someone agree to something, then they sabotage it. And it might be that, you have to say to someone, look, last time you agreed to do this, but then it didn't work out. So let's discuss why it went wrong.
Yeah.
And not accusing them, but saying, I noticed this didn't work as we planned.
And Lynn sort of, mentioned in her answer about listening. And to us, that would be the key as well. So, there are going to be situations where you may not agree, but people are going to be more satisfied and less hostile if they've been given a good hearing. So when the person is telling you what the issue is, it's about really listening to them, asking them questions. So not a cross-examination, just saying, look, you do seem pretty stressed by this. Why is that? To me, it doesn't seem such an important issue, but it obviously is. Can you just, help me understand that? So even ultimately, if you don't agree with them, the fact you've given them the chance to really have a good explanation of their position will go a long way to assisting in resolving the matter. Even if you can't resolve the specifics, the relationship will actually probably be better, and any further discussions will be easier if you've given them that chance.
Yeah.
Quite often as they're answering, you're too busy thinking of your answer back. Well, if you focus on what they're saying and really trying to understand it, and even checking in with them. So you're saying that the reason you want it done this way, or you want this particular contractor for the fence, is because you're concerned about, you know, the other contractor you've had. Is that right? Yep. They understand that you've heard what they're saying, and that will actually assist in improving the way they're responding to during the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I think the challenge for people often with passive aggressive is that it's hard to call it out, because the passive aggressive person is kind of disguising their feelings through cooperation and then acting in the opposite. So again, it's about, you know, calling it out in a way that allows them to save face and without putting in judgment. So it's often about using observations about what happened last time and then saying, so what, from your opinion, what went wrong? Why didn't that work? And providing a bit of, you know, respect for that person, even though you may be frustrated with their behaviour.
And respect is, I mean, it is a two-way thing. If you're able to show them respect, there's a greater chance of them being respectful back to you. So giving the time for the conversation, talking to them politely, addressing them politely, all of those things, you know, might not seem important, but they help to de-escalate the conflict in the situation.
Okay. Do we have any more questions in the chat or the Q&A, Josh?
No additional questions.
I'm just wondering if I can ask Lynn something. Yeah. Obviously, when you are dealing with people who do suffer from anxiety, and it seems as if, I think the statistics indicate that it's increasing in society, what are some suggestions on how you can help someone that you can see is struggling with their emotions, you know, communicate better, I guess, at that stage?
Yeah, I think what you were saying about listening and just trying to be a bit in tune with what's happening for them, and maybe easing into a conversation with them, or, you know, just kind of acknowledging that things are pretty tough. You know, we're all kind of going through different things. I think can be part of that. Just again, it's the same kind of thing, showing that you're kind of wanting to understand what's going on for them and kind of partner together. But I think, yeah, if we're thinking anxiety is really around there's some kind of threat or something that's upsetting to us, that's kind of where anxiety comes from. So if you're working on that basis, then you don't want to do anything that's going to increase the threat. So if you're thinking about, in any event, you know, this is probably a bit threatening. In fact, I'm asking someone to do something they weren't expecting or they don't want to do. Then how do I not make it even more threatening? How do I kind of still stay with what we need, but just come back and do some of those social skill type things, I suppose, of building relationships, rapport building, and then sort of listening to what they've got to say, but then not losing sight of what it is we're wanting, but maybe being a little bit more flexible through listening, then working out how can we both kind of get what we need through this, but not doing anything that's going to make them more anxious. They'll be more sensitive to that.
And I think sometimes when you're in you know, because we're all talking about conflict within relationships, and often in your own personal space, people get frustrated with somebody who's got anxiety. And I just remember one case between two sets of neighbour where one neighbour was anxious and she'd been diagnosed and had certain strategies to try and manage that. And her other neighbours were very frustrated. And when we had our little private chat, I noticed they were quite well dressed, and I said, "Oh, well, what do you do as a living?" And I think one was in real estate and the other was in telecommunications. So I said, "Oh, you must have a lot of people skills." And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, in this context, how would you, if this person was a customer and not a neighbour, how would you manage the situation?" And then we went back into the discussion, and you know, they changed their attitude completely, because they kind of they'd seen this as why are we having to put up with this person as a neighbour, and not, oh, this is a person who has needs and concerns that we need to deal with. So often it's just about changing the perspective of the other person too.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well, we're a little bit over time now, so I might wind it up here and thank our panelists for their discussion. I found it very interesting and stimulating, and I thank the audience for your questions and your participation. And don't forget to look us up on the web if you want to know more about the Dispute Settlement Centre, which is www.disputes.vic.gov.au. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you. Thank you to all the people joining us.
And thank you, Josh, for moderating.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Bye.
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 Bye.